Hello guys, I can see so many of you who are so interested in AI. I don't blame you, it's the hottest topic right now. So this is of course my opening slide, but before we go into the opening slide, Windows error. Now before we go into the opening slide, I'd like to begin with that. So you've got the games using generative AI content or content created by generative AI. And you hear about new types of use almost every day. In December last year, we heard about High on Life using Midjourney to create content for their walls. Then we heard about Ubisoft creating a tool that's called Ghostwriter, which is supposed to create text lines for their NPCs. And just a few days ago, we heard about Blizzard Entertainment patenting or trying to patent a tool which will transfer 2D simple images into 3D textures. And there are many people, there are many questions surrounding this, right? So business people will think, okay, how can these tools be supportive of my business? How can it make it cheaper or faster? The artist will probably think, okay, will it replace me in the near future, right? And you know, some people are very angry, and some people are very cautious about what's going to happen. And of course, there are many questions that are being asked by the lawyers themselves, right? So for us, the most important thing is, how can we use this? How can we advise our clients to use this in a legally safe manner? And today's presentation is exactly about that. I'm going to talk about things that you create with generative AI and how to do that, hopefully without any lawsuits looming in the horizon. My name is Kuba Jankowski. I'm a legal counsel for the company for PROJEKT, or as Westerners like to pronounce it, CD Projekt Red. And I work on a daily basis a lot with our game developers. So I like to think that I know a thing or two. Let's jump into the agenda. So first, we're going to talk about the type of AI that we will cover under this presentation, because I don't want you guys to come in here and think that we are going to speak about some things that we are not going to speak about. Then the risks, something that I already mentioned, right? So there are some risks associated with it, spoiler alert. And after I'm done, I will hopefully present you some practical tips and tricks on how to counter those risks. Sorry to my lawyer friends who are in here, we will not go that much in depth when it comes to legal problems. I'd like this to be understandable to everyone, and hopefully you shouldn't need a PhD in law in order to understand this presentation. And last but not least, conclusion and what's next. Again, this is a very hot topic right now, but a lot is changing as well. So what we are talking about, we are talking about generative AI programs. Think ChatGPT, think Midjourney, think Make a Video. We are talking about programs that are readily available to everyone on the market right now. We are not going to talk about, for example, programs that you can do yourself. And creating assets with set AI from the legal perspective, this is the main thing that we are doing today. Here is a list that I found on the internet. These are programs, AI programs that in theory you could use for video games. This is in no way a recommendation. I don't know most of these programs, however, I only show it to you so that you are aware that there are many programs that you could, in theory, utilize in video game development. What we are not talking about. So first of all, I'm not an artist and I'm not a business person. I'm not going to tell you how to best utilize those tools for your business or for your creations. I'm not going to talk about creating your own AI machine learning algorithms. There are many interesting legal cases surrounding this, but I would run out of time. And of course, there's many other implementations of AI in gaming, so multiplayer marketing, other parts of game dev cycle and creating games like using AI in QA or difficulty scaling or the DLSS that everyone knows. So we're leaving this, let's focus on generative AI programs. And let's start with the definition, because we have to understand what we are talking about before we go into the details. So first of all, the AI program, generative AI program, is a program that is based on artificial intelligence, that is capable of creating new content. Usually this content will be prompt-based, which means that you will receive content on the basis of the text or other content that you provide the program with. These programs learn via machine learning, and currently these programs, which are readily available on the market, are learning on a huge volume of data which is scraped from the internet. So taken directly from the internet, usually, or in 99% of the situations, without the consent of the person who created this content, right? What is important for you to understand, especially in the context of the prompts that you put in those programs learn on the basis of those prompts and images and any kind of content that you provide them with. So in theory, those programs can then use the prompts that you provided them with in order to answer other people who are trying to get some content. And of course, these are UI of two different programs for those of you who haven't had an opportunity so far to use any of them. So on the left side, you've got ChatGPT. On the right side, you've got Dream Studio. You've got, of course, a prompt and then the answer. In some situations, some tools allow you to input some additional context in order to get the best content that you want. Okay, so obviously there is always some risk involved, and we are talking about legal risk today. And I wouldn't be able to do this presentation without at least asking ChatGPT about one thing, right? So I asked ChatGPT about the risks connected with using AI-generated content for video game development. And there are many different points, but I wanted to highlight two different points here. So legal issues and ethical concerns. And in this context, ChatGPT is very self-aware because these are very much true, and we'll cover why they are true. So the new tools are super new and kind of sketchy. So I believe that most of the tools that are currently available were not ready to be put out on the market yet, but most of them were put on the market to be first or somewhere in the forefront of the arms race of the AI tools. So to me, most of these tools, for example, ChatGPT, didn't even have a privacy policy a few days ago. These tools had a very difficult to understand and kind of confusing terms of service. These tools are not really ready to be used in big companies because they don't really have even an administrative panel, etc., etc. That's why there is a number of risks associated with those tools. And some risks are associated with just the fact that law works in a certain way, which I will also cover. So there is something that I like to call 3+1 risks. So first of all, intellectual property infringements. In theory, when you, or very often in practice, when you create something using Midjourney or ChatGPT, it will inevitably include intellectual property of someone else. There is a high possibility of losing your own intellectual property ownership. Finally, when it comes to the legal risks, there are leaks, something that I already covered to some extent. And ethics. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not an expert on ethics, however, I still want to show you guys that there are some concerns that you need to be aware of when you decide to put AI-generated content in a video game. So let us start with intellectual property infringement. So on the right side, you've got 2 examples, actually 10 examples, because there are 9 different instances of Keanu Reeves in there. But all of them were generated by Midjourney, right? Or actually by generative AI. One was generated by Dream Studio, and 9 Keanu Reeves were generated by Midjourney. So you can already see that there is something that's not quite right in there, right? So again, let's begin from the beginning, and let's ask ourselves, how do these programs work? So these programs learn on literally millions and billions of works that are analyzed, that are processed without consent from the original author of those works, right? They are taken straight from the internet. What that means is that this particular content that serves as data for training of those tools will include someone else's intellectual property, and so as a result, very often the output that you can see in here as an example will include someone else's intellectual property like copyrights or someone's likeness, his face, their face, right? This is also protected, by the way. So the question is, can you actually put Vader or Keanu in your game just because AI generated them? Can you do that? Will you be held liable? And the answer is pretty obvious to us. In the terms of service, all of the providers of the currently available tools will tell you, we are not liable for whatever you do with those tools. Whatever you create with those, you are responsible, we're not. So if you do decide to create those things and use them, that's on you. Here are examples of things that were generated by Midjourney, or actually Stable Diffusion. So on the top left and on the bottom right, you can see 2 different images which were generated by AI, and they are currently being used as evidence in a lawsuit in the United States. Getty Images sued Midjourney, sued Stable Diffusion, and other parties. On the basis of the fact that the algorithm that they were using was making use of 12 million images without compensation or permission of Getty Images. You can see that the algorithm was taught on such a big amount of those images taken from this library that it thinks that it has to generate a watermark in order for the prompt to be completed, let's say. And what that tells us is that, well, you only get watermark if you haven't paid for something, right? So it tells us that most certainly Stable Diffusion didn't pay an appropriate license to use this big library of images for their purposes. And we still don't know, that's the interesting part, we still don't know whether that is legal or not. The law is pretty complicated, especially in the US. Some people argue that this is okay to be done under fair use. I don't want to go into the details. However, I want you guys to know that we still don't know what will happen in this case. And we have to, especially as lawyers, we have to look at it and be wary, because this lawsuit alone, I think, can completely delete Stable Diffusion from the market. Because then if this is successful, then everyone will start to sue. And the question is, can tools like Adobe Firefly solve this problem? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Adobe Firefly, but supposedly Adobe is creating an AI tool which only learns on the basis of things which authors consented to. So authors of the images were okay with these images to be a training material for this tool. So in theory, you shouldn't have a problem with an IP infringement in the output, right? Well, this is an image that I found in one of the databases of Adobe. This was marked, labeled as okay for commercial use. And this was labeled as one of the things that Adobe can use for their purposes of training the AI. We didn't consent to this. We didn't. So it's, in theory, it should be safer. However, you have to understand that someone can always claim that they own something and put it into the database that is then being used to teach the AI. It doesn't mean that they are indeed owners of this. So, another risk, losing ownership in your IP. And this is the only theoretical thing that I will talk about. Please bear with me. It is universally accepted almost everywhere in the world, except for UK, but we're not talking about UK because we are not in UK, that AI cannot create copyrighted works. In order to have something that is original, that is copyrightable, that you can, in fact, for example, register with the Copyright Office in the United States, you have to have it created by a human being. So if an animal creates something, like the famous selfie of an ape that was circulating internet 7 years ago, I think, or if you have AI creating something, it will not create anything that is copyrightable. What it means to us is that if the AI creates something and we do not change it in any way, it is not protected. And there was a very interesting case in the US, Zarya of the Dawn. It was a comic book that an artist called Kashtanova was trying to register with the Copyright Office. You can see, by the way, a very interesting thing. Midjourney is credited as one of the authors. Good luck. And what the office initially said is that, okay, we can register it, no problem. But then someone tipped them, you do realize that most of the comic book was created with AI. They were like, oh, shit. Well, then you cannot register that. And the comic book as a whole is right now registered, but the US Copyright Office said it very clearly. If you have an image that is created by AI and you haven't changed it in any way, we cannot register it. And it's the same universally everywhere in the world. So what that tells us is that if you create characters, plot lines, key objects for your video games, if you do that and if you do not change them in any way, then in theory, everyone can take that output created by AI and use them for their own purposes. For example, you create the main character for your video game, it gets very successful, someone gets to know that it was created by an AI, they can take this character and use it in their video game, in their comic book, in their movie, etc., etc. Pretty problematic, right? So another example here to show you that it's not only about the graphical works, it's not only about 3D models, etc. So here is a mod that was created by someone called Block. And it's a mod for a Mountain Blade 2 Banner Lord. And as a lord, you can, in this game, you can visit the villagers from your village. And usually you can just chit-chat, etc. With this particular mod, you can input something that you want to ask an NPC, and ChatGPT will then answer in character to your question. And, well, that's great, but imagine that this NPC creates something that you want to reuse in the future in one of your other games, for example, a really interesting plot line. Well, you can do that, so can everyone else. So it's not really the best to do that. And last but not least, when it comes to the legal aspects of legal risk connected with generative AI leaks. One thing that I want you guys to understand is that right now, if you look in the terms of service of the tools that you have in the market, you will find that none of the providers of those tools are obliged to keep your information secret. What is more, in most of the cases, if not in all of the cases, as I mentioned earlier, the prompts, the images, any kind of content that you provide them with can be used as a teaching material for the tool. And not that long ago, when I was speaking, I was doing a workshop on this, I couldn't give people a real-life example. Well, fortunately for us, and unfortunately for Samsung, there is a real-life case. Samsung actually, on 3 different occasions, leaked their confidential data. In 2 cases, that was programmers who were trying to make their source code better. In one situation, someone was trying to make a transcript of the meeting they just had shorter by using ChatGPT. Don't do that. Don't do that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but don't do that. So there's this thing. They don't have to keep that secret. Another thing is that in most cases, you give those providers a license to use your content. So you give them an opportunity to use it without any additional compensation for you. So they can use not only the output that you created or the AI created for you, but they can also use the prompts directly. And in some cases, this is by design. For example, Midjourney has something that's called Community Showcase, where they will show the most successful examples of using Midjourney, and they will give not only the image that was created, but also the prompt that was used in order to create that image. And finally, ethics. Again, I'm not here to give you like solutions to this problem, but I want you guys to be aware of the fact that there are at least two underlying concerns that are being voiced right now very loudly in the industry. First is, well, we are using someone's work without a proper compensation, right? The things that are being used to teach this AI, well, authors of those works, they are not compensated, they are no attributed, they are not credited in any way, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, something that we originally saw in Industrial Revolution, right? So the problem, the concern that AI will replace workers or may lead to layoffs. And again, these are two things. The third thing that I could add is that right now, if you look at the reception that the community of gamers has towards AI-generated content in video games, you will see that it is mixed, to say the least, right? So you have to be aware of the fact that it is not quite welcome at the moment by the community, and you have to see if your own community is willing to accept that you want to use generative AI. Okay, guys, so you saw all of those different risks, and you might think, okay, so what the hell do I do? Should I avoid using those programs altogether? And if I was legal at your company and that was a realistic option, I would say, yeah, of course, why not? I mean, that's the safest way. But that's not a business-friendly approach, right? So what I tried to do is compile a list of tips and tricks on how you should approach all of those things that we just talked about. So first of all, verify your tools. I know that terms of service are super boring. They are super boring to us as well, trust me. Writing them is not the most exciting thing in the world either. But if you have a legal department, shoot them an email. Ask them to check the terms of service for you. If you don't, then either ask an external lawyer or try to do some research by yourself. Why is that? Well, in general, terms for software are pretty complicated, but terms for generative AI programs are super complicated. And maybe you are selling your own IP to the provider of that AI tool. So, of course, you want to check that. And another thing is, this is all pretty new, and the terms of service change every day. Like a month ago, I was in a conference for lawyers, and we were talking about this, and someone was claiming that this and this tool has this and this in their terms of service. And another lawyer asked, okay, have you checked the terms of service today? No, I checked it like a week ago or something. Well, today they changed it, right? So it changes almost every day. I mean, I don't advise you to check it every day, but maybe once in a month or twice in a month, something like this. Avoid pure AI-generated content in your video games. And what I mean by this is that you shouldn't really use content generated by AI directly in your video game as it was created by AI. As you guys probably remember, first of all, you won't have copyrights in it, and second of all, you can infringe someone else's intellectual property this way. So instead, first of all, using AI-generated content as an inspiration is always a good idea, right? So if you just look at something and it inspires you to do something similar, but just on your own, using your own tools, that will never be a problem, right? If you want to use the content directly, I would advise you to introduce changes. And the more changes, the better, from the copyrightability aspect, but also from the context of the infringement. So for example, if you have this beautiful Vader for the second time now, if you overpainted it as if this was a basis for photo bashing, for example, that's generally where you should go with this, right? And last but not least, if you want to keep something as a reference, right? Because in some situations, you might want to show someone else something that you really enjoyed. You might want to show someone AI-generated content that inspired you, etc., etc. I advise you to mark it in some way. We are at the point where it is difficult for us to discern, for example, photographs, real-life photographs from AI-generated content. In 2 years, we probably won't be able to distinguish these at all. So it may happen that if you send it to someone, they will not realize that it was created by AI and not by yourself. They might be inclined to put that in a video game, right? And we don't want to do that because of the things that I already mentioned. Another thing is key assets and AI don't mix well, right? So because of all the issues, because of all the risks associated with using AI, I would advise you to maybe think twice before you use AI to create key assets. And to give you quite a random example here, but I hope that people from Ubisoft are either not here or won't be angry with me for using this example. If you were to create Ezio Auditore da Firenze, so the main character for Assassin's Creed 2, or if you were to create a logo type for a video game, like the logo type of Assassin's Creed that you can see here, you already know that it would be difficult for you to protect it, and you could, in theory, infringe someone else's rights. And the more visible something is in your game, the more likely someone will see it, and the more likely someone will see the IP infringement, right? So in general, you don't really want to use AI for key assets, maybe using those tools for background assets like graffitis, etc., is a better idea. I don't want you to go through all of these questions, but there are some helpful questions which might aid you in determining whether something is or isn't key assets. And another thing is sensitive info in prompts. I'm only waiting for the photos to be taken, and yeah, sensitive info in prompts. So you already know that the providers don't have to keep your information secret. That's why you shouldn't put sensitive information in your prompts. What kind of info are we even talking about? So first of all, company's confidential data. Think about the game that you're working on but nobody else knows about. Think about the financial data which hasn't been revealed. Financial data of your company, of course. Think about future business opportunities that you already have lined up but you're still in the negotiations and you don't even know if they will happen in the future, right? So all of those things, keep them out of prompts, but especially if you are in a publicly traded company. So if you are in Warsaw Stock Exchange or any other stock exchange. Because there is a special kind of information which is called inside information. This is kind of information that can influence the price of your stock, of your company's stock, if it is revealed. Well, in this situation, it isn't only a matter of you revealing some data of your company and then your supervisors being angry with you for that. You can actually go to jail over this. So I don't want to scare anyone from that, but still, please keep that in mind. Of course, personal data, this is, I think, pretty straightforward. I think everyone in Poland has heard about RODO, GDPR for our foreign friends. So doing that might also give you problems with the Polish Personal Data Authority. And as a bonus, wow, look, it's Vader again. As a bonus, in order to avoid a possibility of infringing someone else's IP, you shouldn't really put references to third-party works, trademarks, or images of real-life people. So you shouldn't do something by prompting, I don't know, McDonald's-inspired building or Jennifer Lawrence on a gala, or, for example, give me a Banksy-style graffiti, right? So to give you guys an example, on the bottom right is something that the AI created on the basis of a prompt which read something like Disneyland in the style of cyberpunk. You of course have the very recognizable castle from Disneyland. This is very much protected, and if we were, for example, to use that in a game, that would be a big no-no. Setting up local instances of programs. So in some situations, the programs such as Stable Diffusion or Microsoft CodeBird can be set up locally because they are distributed under open source licenses. So you can set up something locally, and in theory, if there is no access of to the internet from this tool, you won't be able to leak anything, right? Because there is no outside communication. So you can put way more in the prompts than what I talked about previously. You can also use your own IP in order to build the tool, right? Build the database for your tool so that it can be more useful to you this way. Because again, most of the time, of course, read the terms of service first, but most of the time, these content that you provide won't be used to train a tool that is available to everyone else. It will only be used to train the tool which you are using. And in theory, but this is pure theory at this point, it can be completely free from risk of infringement if you only if you only teach the tool on the basis of your own IP, but I'm not a very technical person, but from what I understand, you need literally millions of works in order to train those things, and not many companies really have that big of a portfolio of content, right? But still, that's theoretically possible. And one thing that I didn't mention before, but you have something that is called right of publicity in the US, and in Poland it's right to the image, and it's virtually the same everywhere in the world, right? So you as a human being, you as a person have a right to your own image, and if your voice is recognizable, for example, you work with your voice, a right to your voice as well. So there are many tools right now on the market, like 11 Labs, which allow you to generate voiceovers using samples of different people. For example, presidents of the United States. I don't know if you saw this, but those who did, they will recognize it. So for sure, please do not use someone's voice in order to generate the voiceovers if you do not have their permission. This is a very easy lawsuit. That's what I can tell you. And also, images, there is this trend to create content exactly with Bill Murphy or whatever actor face being used in the context of, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, etc. I saw this kind of remake lately. Especially in the context of actors, but also in other contexts, you should be wary of using faces that are given to you by AI, because you never know how close those faces are to real-life faces. And another point here, actors' guilds. This is something that is not really on the European market, but in the US, you will know that many different kinds of professions have their own guilds. You probably heard about the strikes that the writers' guilds are now having. Well, actors have their own guilds as well, and they have a say in how actors' appearance is being used. So you don't only have to get a permission from the actor, you also had to get a proper permission from the guild as well. What's next? Well, You probably heard about this. So Italy banned ChatGPT over the fact that it tells us that it is okay to put pineapple on pizza. Not really. So there are problems with analyzing personal data, right? There was no basis for analyzing a large amount of personal data in the context of this tool, so Italy just decided to, okay, we ban it, right? It has since been reinstated, so Italians can now use this tool. However, it shows us that we are right now in a state of turmoil. We have no idea what will happen next, to be honest. Authorities can step in and, in theory, change something overnight. So one thing that I want you guys to know is that all of those things that we talked about, they can change very rapidly. Especially in the context of new legislation and new case law. So in EU, for example, there is this new thing that's called an AI Act. Changes to the AI Act, which concern derivative AI, were published only 2 weeks ago, so this is a super fresh thing. But basically, it's still being proceeded. It's still not in force. However, in the project, the MEPs decided to put obligations for the providers of tools, AI tools that we already covered. So for example, you have an obligation as the provider of such tool, you will have probably, to provide us, everyone, with a list of content which you use to train your AI. So that's super problematic. And another thing, you have an obligation for your tool to not create content which is problematic or which infringes someone's rights. And it's not only intellectual property rights, it's also rights to the image, it's also rights to your religion, it also rights to your good name, etc., etc. So you can already see that this is pretty problematic, especially for the tools as they are on the market right now. It's virtually impossible to meet those standards right now, to be honest. And I'm wondering where it will go. However, if it were to be introduced right now, everyone would be fined, right? So we'll see how that influences how those tools are being developed. New tools are emerging all the time. I mentioned to you already Adobe Firefly. Some of them might be less risky, some of them might be more risky. Be on the lookout and see whether those tool providers promise you with no IP infringements, for example, or no leaks. Because those tools, as they appear, they will be better to use for sure, especially from the legal perspective for you. And I mentioned to you one legal case that's happening in the US. There are 2 others that are happening in the US. There probably are way more on the line in the future. We'll see. This is something that will for sure also influence how those tools are being developed and used. And one last thing that I would like to tell you is that if you intend to use generative AI, stay up to date, read up, be flexible, and please do not put your meetings in ChatGPT. Don't do that. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Kuba. We have 5 more minutes for any questions, if you have.
Hello. We listened about that we couldn't use Darth Vader or Keanu Reeves. It's obvious. But what about the styles? For example, one of the best style copies that I see in Midjourney, it was the copy of the Studio Ghibli style. And it didn't copy the characters itself. It was really good in copying the style itself. So it looks like original content. And how company could work with it, or how the guys who created it, how we could perceive this content.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. So there's some good news and some bad news. So first of all, in general, from the IP perspective, from the copyright perspective, the style of someone is not really copyrightable. So you cannot protect just a style,
Yes.
right? However, very often if you ask the AI to produce something in a style of someone or something, they will provide you with some things which are just in a style, but some things which are taken directly from the copyrighted works of this particular person or a company, right? So you will get this in the style, this in the style, this in the style, and then you get Darth Vader, for example, right?
You mean like it will be used some elements?
Yeah,
In
so
general.
you can only get one element in there which is copyrightable, and it will already screw you up,
But
right?
it's
You have to be careful.
one element. It's quite complicated, and as I say about the Studio Ghibli, and I know all their movies, all their works, and see a lot of content generated in their style. It's quite unique, so it's complicated situation for me even to understand.
Yeah, for sure. So in general, what you have to understand is that the style itself is not really copyrightable. So if you do something, even on your own as an artist, in the style of someone, it's debatable whether it is or isn't copyrightable or protected as a publicity right in the US, but that's a whole another story in there. In most cases, you should be safe just trying to copy the style. However, you should still remember about the fact that if something creates AI-generated content for you, it is not copyrightable. So if you decide to use that in your own game, anyone else can also use that in their own game or any other content. I hope that answers your question to some extent, at least.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. My quick question would be, you said that you're working with designers already using some of the tools and helping them out. In the current state, in your experience, are there any departments that, for example, have more affinity to AI? Is it more programmers, musicians, writers, designers? Is there any pushback from any departments, more or less?
Yeah, so I won't discuss the CDPR related situation, but I can see that on the market, the most prolific teams that use AI are concept art and programmers. I didn't touch upon programming at all in this presentation. This is a whole another thing. In general, if there are some programmers in here or someone working with programmers, I would advise against using AI tools for programming in general at the moment. Neither ChatGPT or the GitHub Copilot are safe to be used, to be honest. However, yeah, that's the thing that I see most. It's concept art, it's programming, it's maybe right now 3D modeling as well, because there are more and more tools which are happening which convert to the art into 3D models.
Thanks.
No worries.
Okay, thank you so much. Remember about giving Kuba a high score in Synskop. And thank you and see you all later.
Thank you, guys.